All right, good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Culberson, and today I'll be talking about database lifecycle management at Duke Energy. Tell you a little bit about myself. I am a DevOps engineer at Duke Energy. I've been in this role for about 2 years. I've been working at Duke Energy for approximately, I guess, about 10 years now. And prior to working in this role, I worked as a support analyst and also on project teams. I worked as in the tech lead and developer roles on tech teams. I enjoy being a DevOps engineer because it gives me the opportunity to help our customers solve problems by using the DevOps pipeline. So today what I'm going to talk about is a problem that we helped solve for one of our customers. So last year, we were approached by our corporate data hub team, and they were interested in automating database deployments. So they approached our team, and we conducted a POC. So the data hub team, they had went ahead and did all of the research and the work. They had researched the tools around automated, and they had selected a tool, which was the Redgate SQL tool belt. So that was the tool that they selected. And the team had also address some of the cultural issues around automating database deployments. So the team had management buy-in, so they already approached their management team, and the management bought into the process. And they also negotiated with the database administrators that supported the data hub, because that was a big challenge for them. So they went ahead and addressed that and went through some negotiation, and and that process was, and they came up with a process that the DBAs approved. So, so today I'm going to talk about deploying SQL Server database changes using our DevOps pipeline. So what I want to talk about now is what the manual database deployment workflow looks like. So today, the manual process, the developer will package up the SQL scripts, submit a request to the DBA to execute those scripts on a target server. The DBA will pick up that request, and then the DBA will retrieve those scripts from the staging area, wherever the developer had put those scripts, then execute the scripts, close out the ticket, and then let the developer know that the changes have been submitted, and the developer will go out and test those changes. So that is the current workflow, and that could take anywhere from two to 4 days to complete. So what problems are we trying to solve with the DevOps pipeline? So first is faster response time for database changes. So if you take a look at the manual process, if there is a problem, let's say, for example, that it took 4 days for that change to get approved and to get loaded into the target environment. So, and there was a problem, and the developer had to push out another change. And so let's say that change took 3 to 4 days to complete. So you're looking at potentially 8 days for a change to get implemented in the database environment. So if you're working on a Scrum team and you have a 2-week sprint cadence, so you could potentially, if that feature was dependent on that database change and that sprint goal, you could potentially risk not achieving that sprint goal because of the lag time in getting that database change pushed through. So another issue that we're trying to address is increased reliability of database releases. So if you take a look at the manual deployment process, there were 3 points of 3 areas where there was human interaction where something could go wrong. The first is where the developer stages the SQL scripts and puts them in a staging area. The other is where the DBA picks up those scripts from the staging area and then executes those scripts on the target server. So at any given point, the developer or DBA could become distracted either by someone walking up to them and talking, or a phone call or an email, and then a script could get missed. And what that would result in is an issue. So once the work is complete, the developer is testing out the change, and then the developer finds out, hey, something's not working, and the developer is spending time troubleshooting the issue, which is not really an issue. What it is a mistake was made either by the developer or the DBA by missing a step during the process. And the last thing we're wanting to address is freeing up database administrators from doing low-value work. And so DBAs, instead of managing their, instead of trying to make time in their schedule to run these scripts, they could be focusing on keeping their production database system running. So what I want to talk about is the process that we use for onboarding teams who are interested in using this process. And it's sort of like a 4-phase process. I call phase 1 is the homework phase. That's where we give the application team some tasks. They complete those tasks, and then they come back to us. The second phase is where they start working with the tool. And the tool that we're using is Redgate, the Redgate SQL tool belt. So the second phase is when they actually use those tools to link to the database. The third phase is continuous integration. That's where you actually use Jenkins to replace some of those manual steps. And the last phase is release orchestration, and that's where we tie everything together and try to remove all those manual steps and use our release orchestration tool. So for the homework phase, first we meet with the application team to set expectations. So the first thing we want to emphasize is that we're not trying to push changes to production. So, because usually you'll have some skeptics, and so what you want to do is try to build confidence. So we want to target non-production databases. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the DBA approval process does not go away. So we don't want to replace that. So if there is a DBA, if the DBA is required to review scripts before they're pushed in, if we automate this process, that process does not go away. And we also take a look at their deployment process. So we may find out that the process that we have in place may not work for them, and we discuss that as well. Also, we discuss what's in and out of scope. So for the tool set we're using, there may be some items that may not work well for us keeping in source code, such as users and permissions, because those do not transfer well between environments. The next thing we'll look at is experience with source code management tools. Usually within a team, there's there's usually one person who has some development experience and has some experience working with some tools. And so we sort of depend on those individuals to help train the application team on those tools. And then we discuss the branching and merging strategy. So for example, if we're using Git as a source control, you can have a very basic workflow, such as centralized workflow, or a complex workflow, such as Git flow. So that's something that we discuss with the application teams. And then the next thing is the deployment approval process. So we want to make sure that everyone understands what that approval process looks like. And the development tools, as I mentioned before, Redgate was the tools that we chose. So the developers who are going to be working with this process, they need to make sure that they've acquired the licenses and started working with those tools and gotten familiar with that process. And the last thing is to identify a candidate database. So as I mentioned earlier, that we're trying to that you want to build confidence in the process, get everyone's buy-in. So you do not want to pick a database that's highly visible, mission critical. That wouldn't be a good database to pick. And you also don't want to pick something that's insignificant, where you maybe only push changes once a year. You want something that's big enough and significant so that it shows value, so that management and the DBAs can see the value in the process by pushing those changes. And so the next phase is where you actually link a database to source control. So this is the workflow for that. So now a developer will be updating the database using SQL Server Managed Studio and Redgate SQL Source Control. The developer will commit those changes using the Redgate tool. The developer will, at this point, then the developer will submit a request to the DBA to push those changes to production, or to the, not production, but to the target environment. And then the DBA will use Redgate the Redgate SQL Compare tool to deploy those changes. And then once that's done, developer will test those changes. So what we've done now from the manual process, so now we remove those points of failure, human points of failure. So now instead of a developer copying those scripts and staging them somewhere, now we're using the Redgate SQL source control to manage those changes. The DBA is now using the Redgate SQL compare tool to now deploy those changes. So the DBA is not copying scripts from the staging area and then pushing those somewhere. So if the team does not go any further, they now have increased the reliability of the deployments by removing some of those human interactions where something can go wrong. So what I have now is a quick little demo on linking a database to source control, and then I'm gonna create a new view, and then manually deploy that change using the Redgate tools. So so right here, this is the let's see. All right, so right here, this is the process go through for us linking it. So I'm gonna select a database that's not under source control, and this is using the Redgate SQL source control. You have a few steps you have to choose from. So and then you have a couple of options on the next screen. So so in this case, I'm using Git, so that's what I'm gonna leave selected. And then you select your folder where you want your scripts to reside on your machine. And then you select your development model, which is either dedicated or shared. So I already have a database that's under source control, which is the AdventureWorks project. So now what I'm gonna do is go through the process of creating a new view and manually deploying that view. So I just ran a script and I just created a view. And as you see now that there's a little blue dot indicating that there are changes that haven't been committed to source control. So using the Redgate SQL source control tool, now I'm gonna push those changes into back into the source control. So I'm gonna commit those changes. And now I'm gonna push those changes to the remote. And so at this point, this is where the DBA would pull the latest code out of the version control and then use the Redgate SQL compare tool to deploy those changes. So here, the source control would be the source, and then the target would be whatever your target database is. Then you go through a series of steps. Here, a comparison was done against the SQL source control and the target database, and it shows that there is a difference. And then click deploy, then a few more clicks. And also you have an option of either saving the script or as well if you want to deploy it at a later time. So you get another option to review. And finally deploy the change. So now if we go back to the target database, I'm gonna refresh the view and you should see that view now appears. So, so now it's just a continuous process. So now whenever the developer makes a change, you use the SQL Server Management Studio to make those changes. And then when those changes are ready to be pushed to another database, then submits a request to the DBA. Then the DBA will use the Redgate SQL compare tool to push those changes. So now I want to get to the fun part, and that's the phase 3 and phase 4, which is continuous integration and release orchestration. So for these phases, this is where we're going to remove the manual steps that the DBA had used in the previous workflow, with the exception of the review step. So now the developer continues to use SQL Server Management Studio and Redgate SQL source control to make those changes. So the developer will make their changes. Developer submits pull requests and merge changes to another branch. And then now, instead of having the DBA using the Redgate SQL Compare tool to publish those changes, we're going to use Jenkins. So Jenkins will have a Jenkins job that will pull the source code, pull the source code down into the workspace, use the Redgate SQL automation and SQL Compare tools to build a database NuGet package, and then publish that database NuGet package to Nexus. So now we remove the DBA's interaction with Jenkins. So this last phase is the release orchestration phase. So in this phase, this is where we'll have automated deployments to the non-production environments, and this is where we'll establish approval gates and establish review steps, and try to build confidence in the automated deployment process. So for the release orchestration, I'll be using XL release for this. And in XL release, I can establish approval gates for the DBA and manager approvals, so to capture that interaction. So what I want to do is go over the non-approval deployment workflow. So in this workflow, the developer merges changes to a branch, and that will trigger a Jenkins job, that will trigger a XL release, and then and what that release will do, it will trigger a build job that will retrieve the source code and build a database NuGet package and deploy those changes to and publish those changes to Nexus. And then XL release will then trigger a urban code deployment job that will deploy those database changes to the target database. And this is a non-approval. So this is where during that homework phase, if you had an agreement where there's certain target databases that do not require any type of approvals, then that's where this will come into play. And then the next is a QA deployment workflow. And so this is a little different. So this is when the developer, let's say if you're using like a Git flow workflow, so the developer merges to the release branch, and then at that point, the release manager will start a new release in XL release. And so when that's in XL release, the first step's the same. That will trigger a build job that will create the database NuGet package and publish that to Nexus. But now there are some additional steps in the process. The first, for Urban Code Deploy, I have a staged database step. So Urban Code, with the help of Redgate SQL automation and SQL Compare, what it will do is take the database NuGet package, which will be considered the source, and then it will take a look at the target, do a comparison, and generate an update script, and stage that on the UCD agent. And so now there's a DBA review and approval gate task in XL release. So that gives the DBA time to go and review that script and confirm that it looks okay, and then approve that, and then it'll move on in the process. And then the manager, once the manager gets notification of the approval, the manager's aware that the DBA has already reviewed the script and approved it, and then the manager can approve that, and then that will trigger another Urban Code deploy job, which will actually take those changes and deploy those changes to the target server. So for this demo, I have a non-approval deployment to a development database with a view change, and then I have another demo, what's going to be a deployment to a QA database. And so that will demonstrate the DBA review and approval and manager approval gates in the release. So here, I'm going to delete the view that was created earlier. And then I'm going to commit those changes to source control. And so when I push these changes to the remote, that's going to trigger a Jenkins job. That's going to trigger a release. And so this is triggering a job that's going to create a release, an XL release. And so I have a development phase here. There's a build task, a deploy task, and then there's a notification task. And so Jenkins kicked off that build job. So Jenkins is creating that database package. Now it's going to the deployment phase. So now it's kicking off an urban code deploy job, and now it deploy those changes to the target environment. So now if I go back, go to the target, do a refresh, and see that now that view has been removed. And so now, next, I want to demonstrate what a QA release will look like. So I have two phases here. I have the QA phase and production phase, and there's some tasks, create a Jira story. There's a build task. That's the same as in the non-approval release. Now I have a staged database package step here, and then I have a DBA approval gate and a manager approval gate task. So you start your release. And kick it off. Now it's going to kick off the build process. And so this is building off the release branch. Now it's going to stage those changes, and here's the DBA approval. And remember when I said earlier that by automating this process, the DBA review process does not go away. And one nice thing with the Rig8 tools, this provides a way where it generates a report. And so here it's, in this case, I'm adding a view change. So the DBA review process does not go away. So in the manual process, if the DBA is reviewing all of the scripts, you still have the opportunity of doing that there. So now it's going to continue to the manager approval step. And at this point, the manager knows that the DBA has already reviewed the steps. And so once that's approved, now the changes are deployed to the QA environment. So it kicks off the urban code deploy to deploy those changes. And then you have whatever other tasks that you need to do in XL release. So that's it for as the release. So the end result, we have database under source code management. We have an automated approval and deployment process with database changes across environments. We have faster and more reliable deployments. And we also develop a common standards for documenting and tracking database changes. So references. Okay, any questions? All right. Okay.
Did your lead time change significantly, or it's still about the same compared to the manual process?
Well, that's all far as that process goes. I mean, that's I guess it's all dependent on the team and who you're working with. So what XL release will do, it will notify the individuals that, hey, you got a task out there waiting for you. So you get that automatic notification, and the good thing with the tool, as a developer or release manager, you can go and check the status of the task. So if whoever that task is assigned with, you can always go and say, hey, you got something waiting up there for you. So.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? It seems you don't need to shout, so I guess, it's better. No more questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.